Yeah, that's right. We're taking this boring non-turbo engine from a Stratus, going to throw some SRT parts in it, maybe tweak the ring gap a little bit so we can hang this on the side and pray it doesn't blow up. Guys, welcome back to the garage. Thanks for joining me on another video on the SRT4 swap Dakota. Let's go over the parts. We got a set of used factory SRT4 rods, SRT4 pistons, new rings, new factory head bolts, set of king bearings, and then, gaskets and timing belt kit, ignition stuff. Now, hopefully, once we crack this thing open and we get the crank out of it, the stock bearings in there are fine, the crank's fine, so we can just put stock bearings back in it. Now, we'll check the clearances with some plasti gauge just to make sure, but it's only supposed to have 93,000 miles on it. It's from a 2003 Stratus, so I imagine it wasn't beat on. It's fairly clean, so let's hope the inside is just as clean. All right, we got a first look of inside the engine, and I'm telling you what, that's clean. So I'm really happy to see that. Hopefully the rest of the insides are as clean as this. All right, things look pretty good. A lot of crustiness up here, but that's typical. These pistons sit kind of far down in the bore, even at top dead center. So running cheap gas for all of its life and probably babied. It's normal to see this crust up here, but down in the cylinder walls, they look great. You still see cross hatching. There's no scrapes or pits or anything on any of the bores. So that's a big plus. I don't see any signs of a head gasket failure or anything. Deck surface looks great, along with the surface of the head. I don't see anything that is scary. Should clean up real nice. And it does look like it had a factory head gasket and factory head bolts. So it's a good chance this thing has never been opened up. So I'm gonna finish this side of the motor, get all this stuff off. We'll rotate it, take the pan off, and start disassembling the bottom end. All right, after that very questionable procedure in getting those pistons out, we have the bottom end completely disassembled. These bearings look fantastic. Every bearing, all the rod end bearings, really nice. Crank journals look beautiful. And you can see this is the factory turbo forged rod versus the NA rod. It's much thinner here compared to the turbo rods. So these should be able to handle a little bit of boost. Of course, we'll probably throw a little extra gap on this piston rings, but other than that, it'll be a stock rebuild. Now, I'm sure you guys are asking, why is this guy throwing stock stuff in this block when he's got it all tore down? Well, we try to do this on as much of his budget as possible. So you can basically get those stock SRT4 rods for free. I'm looking just to get maybe 350, 400 horsepower in this truck, and I think that'll be plenty, at least for now. We can always do an upgrade later. So next order of business, we're gonna get this block cleaned. We'll assemble the pistons and rods together, and we'll start gapping rings. All right, got a little carried away, and now the block is pretty much clean. You can see it cleaned up really nice. I don't even think I'm gonna paint it. Next thing is we're gonna deglaze these cylinders by just running a stone hone through there real quick, just to get the glaze off, restore some of the cross hatching, get rid of the carbon lip up here. Now you can use pretty much any kind of lubricant you want whenever you're doing this. Something on the lighter side just because you don't want to gum up the stones. So I like to use WD-40 usually, but all I have is this PB Blaster. So we're going to use that. I'm just going to soak this cylinder down, put a little bit on my stones here. Now we'll just do a quick check to see how we're looking. Not too bad. I think we want to do another pass. Almost there. I got a little bit more to go just to get some of this discoloration out of there, but we're really close. Now the service manual calls for 40 to 60 degree crosshatch. We're pretty much there. Maybe I need to go a little bit faster. And there we go. After a few passes, it all looks pretty good. No reason to go any more than that. That should be a good break-in surface for the rings. So we're going to call that good, and I'm going to knock the rest of these out. And just like that, they are all done. Now, remember, we're not looking to make the cylinders bigger or anything. We're simply taking the glaze off just so we have a fresh surface for the rings to seat on. So I didn't go crazy, and then I cleaned them real good and wiped them down with oil. That way they don't flash rust. So now we can start getting pistons assembled and the rings gapped. So stock ring gap specifications say, you know what, you want a max of 15 thousandths for the top and secondary compression rings. I think what my plan is go to maybe 18 thousandths and 20 thousandths on the bottom. That should give a little bit more room for extra boost. Okay, we're going to take our first ring, our top ring, very gently get it down in the bore. And we'll take our new piston and we're just going to push it down maybe an inch or so. I want to make sure that we're square. That looks pretty good right there. I'm going to take our first measurement. I'm going to go right to 15 to see how close we are. Wow, it fits. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit off of there and check it again. Okay, now we got a ring gap tool, and the most important thing to do is to make sure you're keeping this square on your grinding disc. You don't want it angled either way, you want it nice and square. So we're going to take just a little bit off. Nothing crazy. We'll just start there and see what happens. And you're going to want to take a file and make sure you have no burrs on there. Real lightly. And we're going to put it down in there the same spot that it was the first time we checked it. And I know that I had these sides of the pistons right here flush with the deck. So we're going to go back to 17 thousandths and check that. Okay, it's definitely there. Let's try 18. Okay, here's 18. And it's tight. So just a little bit more. It should get us to that 18, which is 3 thousandths higher than factory maximum. So a little bit more gap on that top ring. Okay, we got 18. It's tight, but it's in there. Let's see if it goes to 19. Yeah. All right, 18 thousandths on the top compression ring. So there's one done. I got the 3 other top rings to do, and then I have the bottom rings, and we're going to go to 20 thousandths on those. Now, of course, I'm not going to make you guys watch me do all 8 rings, so I got them all done. It's a little tedious, but once you get started, you kind of know where you need to be every time you do one. So all those are done. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about the rings, I did check them down in the bore also. I put them all the way down, maybe an inch or so from the bottom, rechecked all my gaps just to make sure they were the same as they were up here at the top of the cylinder. If you've got an engine with a lot of miles and a lot of wear, the bore can actually taper where the top of the bore is actually bigger in diameter than the bottom of the bore. So what can happen is if you only check the ring gap at the top, as the piston goes down in the bore, the ring gap can tighten up. So it's important to check the ring gap up here and down there just to make sure the gap isn't tightening up as this piston goes down in the bore. Now we can assemble the pistons. All right, these factory pistons are a full floating wrist pin, so it makes it nice and easy to assemble. Let's put some assembly lube on here. Then the fun part of putting the locks in. All right, there it is, one piston done. So I'm going to knock the rest of these out and then we can throw the rings on. All right, pistons are all assembled, ready to go. And of course, we're not going to reuse our stock rod bolts just for insurance. So we're going to switch over to ARP bolts. Now I know there's a lot of controversy about using ARP rod bolts in stock rods. It could potentially cause the rod end to be out of round when you torque down those ARPs, but plenty of SRT4 guys have had no problem running the ARPs in the stock rods, so we're going to do it. Of course, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but in our case, that's what we're going with. All right, let's do some rings. So we'll start with number 4. We'll do the oil ring first. We'll do the middle, and then we'll do the top and bottom oil rings. Okay, there's the oil rings on there. Then we'll do our second compression ring. Now that's not the right way to do it, but that's how I'm doing it. You're supposed to use a special tool for the rings, but we don't have that. There we go. One piston done. Now before we put these in, we will orientate all the rings to the proper spots, so that way none of the gaps are in line, but for now, we'll just let them hang out like that. And I want to knock the rest of these out. And we got all the rings on there. Now one thing you want to pay attention to is direction of the top and secondary compression rings. OEM ones are a little different than these aftermarket Malley rings. These Malleys just have a mark on the top of the ring. It tells you which side is up, so pay attention to that. If you're using OEM rings, they have a direction. These aftermarket ones just tell you which side is up. So all those are done. So next up, we're going to do a dry run of the crank and bearings in here. Now, I'm pretty confident this is going to be a huge waste of time considering the condition of the engine so far, but we're here. We might as well check the bearing clearances. So I'm going to throw the bearings in here, set the crank in it, throw the bearings in the bed plate. We'll throw the bed plate on and torque it down, take it back off, and we'll have plastic gauge in there and we'll check some clearances. All right, here we go. Now the max clearance we want is 24 thousandths, so we're gonna go to right to 2 thousandths, and it's right there on 2 thousandths. Every single one of them. I call that a win right there. So we're right there on the max of what the service manual was asking for bearing clearance. So I think we're okay. She'll be a little loose, but that's all right. Now you can see right there, we're just barely inside the 2000ths range. So that's about perfect. If we go to 3000ths, definitely not that. I'm gonna pull this crank out and we can lube up the bearings and put it in for good. And again, I'm just using normal king bearings, just standard size. I figured with the health of this engine, standard size would be good. So far we're in the range. Now when it comes to the rod bearings, that's going to be a different story because those rods did not come off of the crank that's in this engine. So hopefully we'll be in range just like the mains. So let's lube up these bearings so we can put the crank back in. We'll lay down a bead of anaerobic sealant, put the bed plate on and torque it down. All right, crank's back in it and it turns really nice and smooth. So I think we can go ahead and throw the pistons in. Okay, I got my number 1 cylinder piston ready. And you see I just used the stock connecting rod bolts, cut the heads off, put some tubing on there just so it doesn't mark on the crank when we go to push this thing in. Got my rings all orientated using this guide right here. And basically the compression ring gaps are opposite and then the oil ring gaps are opposite. That's basically what it is. But if you need to know, there you go. So now I'm going to throw this compressor on the piston, compress these rings down. And then I got the crank so that the journal is down so that the piston, when we put it in, will be down towards the bottom. And we'll have to flip it over, put the cap on with some plastic gauge, check the bearing clearance, and as long as it's good, we can lube up the bearing, put the cap back on, and then that cylinder will be done. And we'll have to do the same thing for 2, 3, and 4. Now these pistons are directional. On these aftermarket ones, they have an arrow pointing towards the front, and I believe the OEM ones also have an arrow. All right, let's see if this goes in the first time. Sweet. Now, of course, with ARPs, you got to use their lube, and they want it on the threads and then underneath the head of the bolt. Now, Modern Performance says to torque these to 40 foot-pounds, so I'm going to do 20 each and then the 40. All right, now we'll remove them. Okay, a service manual says a max of 27 thousandths. So I got 3 thousandths right here, and I'm going to say we're just under 3 thousandths. So again, we're a little loose on the mains. We're going to be a little loose on the connecting rod ends. That's not a big deal. So now I'm going to push this rod off. We'll lube up that bearing, lube up the other bearing on the cap, put this one back together, and then I'm going to knock out these other 3. And there we go. Full rotating assembly done. Spins nice and easy. Okay, now we're going to attack the balance shaft assembly, and I know a lot of guys, when they delete the balance shafts, they just cut the chain and leave this whole assembly in there. Now, I think I'm going to gut the case, and we will bolt this back in to mainly act as a windage tray for the oil. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy about does that actually support the bed plate or not. I'm not sure, but we're going to bolt it back in. It'll act as a windage tray for the oil. We will have some more oil capacity due to the fact that this thing will be gutted. So we'll have to add a little bit more oil. And of course, we'll plug the oil port. That way we have no extra oil pressure going to this. And I'm going to plug the port on the housing itself. Instead of doing the block, we already got it assembled. I'm not going to drill in there or try tapping anything. So we'll just leave that hole like it is. We'll plug this hole, gut this assembly, bolt it back in. So I'm going to pull this cover off. Flip it around. We got to pull this 13 off of here. Take our plate off. Take a gear off of there. Slide out one of our balance shafts. There's the other gear and the other balance shaft. So now we got a nice empty housing that we can throw back in there, but first we're going to plug that port. I got a little 8mm set screw, so I'm going to drill and tap it. You definitely want to make sure you get all the shavings out of there, so we don't want those going back in the engine. So now with our housing all cleaned up and some threads tapped in there, I want to throw some red Loctite on our set screw because we don't want that to come out, but there's no way it's going to pass through the housing since oil pressure will be pushing on it this way. All right, she's recessed down in there. You don't want your set screw to be past this mating surface, that way this seals properly. So now we throw this back in. All right, there we go. These just get torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. Balance shaft delete is done. And as far as the sprocket on the crank, we're just gonna leave that there, not even mess with it. It's not gonna hurt anything being there. So now we'll move on to the oil pump. All right, so oil pumps. As far as I'm aware, there's three options. You have your turbo or SRT4 pump, you have the NA front wheel drive pumps, and then you have the Jeep rear wheel drive pumps. Now, ideally, I would have liked to use an SRT pump just because it flows the best of all the 2.4 pumps. But that would require me to use the SRT4 oil pan, which I did not want to do. I wanted to run this Jeep rear wheel drive pan. So you would think, since I'm using the rear wheel drive Jeep pan, I would use a rear wheel drive Jeep oil pump. Well, there's a problem with that. Those pumps have a separate oil filter housing that bolts onto the pump. Now, both the Liberty and Wrangler filter housings bolt to the passenger side of the oil pump. The Wrangler kicks it back this way towards the passenger side, which in my case would put it right here, and I just wasn't a fan of that. Now, the Liberty filter housing actually directs the filter forward on the engine, which would have worked, but like most Jeep 2.4 parts, they're just non-existent. The filter housings are discontinued from Mopar. Finding used Jeep 2.4 parts is very hard, especially Liberty parts. So I did find a few of the Wrangler filter housings, but like I said, I just didn't think it was gonna work. Now, the older 2.4s from like the 90s, I saw some of those pumps, the filter actually sits below the crank, and that could have worked for my situation, but I just wanted to stick with a newer 03 and up style pump. So we're gonna run the Stratus front wheel drive pump, which is the same as like a Caravan. I like the filter placement. So I went through, cleaned this up, opened it up, checked the oil pump rotors and the housing, make sure everything looked good, threw it back together, and now it's ready to throw on the engine. So we got the oil pump here. I got the anaerobic sealant on the surface and a new O-ring. Let's slide this guy on. Then these bolts get torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. All right, oil pickup. I ran into a little problem. The Jeep rear-wheel drive pickup actually has the bolt hole on the other side. So what I had to do was I cut the bolt hole part of the flange off the Stratus pickup that came on this pump, and I welded it onto the rear-wheel drive pickup. So now this will bolt onto this pump, and it's also supported by another bolt down there on the bed plate. So you can see I have this bed plate bolt out because on the factory 2.4 rear-wheel drive engines, the bolt that goes here actually has a stud coming out of the top, which of course you can't buy new because it's discontinued, and good luck finding one used to buy. So I just got a slightly longer bolt, and I'm going to use this as a spacer to put under the mounting tab on the pickup, and that should work. So I'm going to slide this nut under there as my spacer. Put a bolt in. And of course, torque it like the other bed plate bolts to 20 foot-pounds. All right, now we're ready for the oil pan, but before we do that, we need to put a little RTV right here at the seam where the block meets the oil pump. So we're just going to do a little smear right there on both sides. We got our oil pan gasket, which is the Jeep one. I'm not sure if it's different for the other cars. Now we can put on the oil pan. And then the bolts get torqued down to 105 inch-pounds. All right, bottom end is assembled. Now, has this been a super precise rebuild? Not exactly, but for a garage build, I think we're looking pretty good. But I think we'll end off the video here. We'll split this up in two parts. So next video, we'll get the head on, get the timing set on, and you want to stick around for that one because I had a subscriber actually send some Go Fast parts for the engine. So things have escalated a little bit. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys on the next one.